What is up, my cutouts cardboard ninja coming at you with planned balance changes to cross out. The date is April 9th. Looks as though they're gonna make some changes to the cap can. So I was actually going over this on my stream recently about how the cap can will basically anchor you to the planet Earth, and there is nothing the fuck you can do about it. It looks as though that the devs have realized that the cap can, despite all of its mini nerfs, needs an additional nerf. Basically, there's inconsistent behavior with a cap can. Everyone knows this. You could be a 10 gajillion ton vehicle. You could be covered in boosters, and you could be hurtling along at Mach 7, and a cap can hits you, and then, you snap to the earth and you're fucked forever. Well, so it turns out they're going to try and set 3 different modes based on your speed and your mass, and if your momentum has a certain value, the cable will never break. This sounds familiar, which is of course what it is right now. If your momentum, I mean, it's inconsistent, but the cable will basically never break. However, if your momentum is higher than that value and below the maximum value, it will break after a delay, meaning that you won't get held in the ground for the full 6 seconds, like it matters. And if the vehicle momentum is higher than the maximum value, the cable will simply snap instantly. They're giving some example numbers, but basically, if you're a 10-ton vehicle at 100 kilometers an hour, it'll break with a delay, but you have to reach 160 kilometers an hour with a 10-ton vehicle to break it instantly. However, a 20-ton car will break it instantly at 80 kilometers an hour. That's a very linear graph, I guess, meaning that the heavier you are and the faster you are, the more likely you are to actually escape a cap can. We'll see. I mean, they said this shit before. They've said that shit before. Continuing on, the Jotun, and this is true of all cryogenic weapons, is getting a buff. The damage from the projectile explosion when you hit them with the actual weapon is increased by 50%, and the puddle applies the freezing effect 33% faster. I haven't created the video yet because it's difficult to frame, but in case you guys are interested, the Jotun is dog shit at cooling. It's much worse than the incinerator. Let's ignore the effects of cooling versus heating for just a moment and just go on a 1-to-1 ratio for the amount that it cools your build. It currently takes 2 Jotuns at the same time to cool your build slower by, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2%, 2% slower than 1 incinerator. That's not good. So the freezing effect is being applied 33% faster. This means the Jotun will be about 1.2, so it'll be still significantly less effective than the incinerator, and that's not including the effect of what cooling does versus what the effect of heating is. It simply is still less effective than the incinerator is at heating you. And that will be the case, but long story short, Jotun sucks. They know it. They've seen that it sucks, and they're trying to make it suck less. This is going to require at least 1 more buff to make the Jotun good. And this, after the 33% faster increase, it's going to need a buff of about 60% to make it about even to the incinerator. The Tormentor and the Mauler. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's start with the Tormentor. With more than 1 module activated simultaneously, the effectiveness of each subsequent module will now amount to 80% of the previous one. Basically, they're making damage, the damage bonus multiplicative instead of additive. This is a nerf, and the reason why is because, well, multiple Tormentors installed in one vehicle at once increase the effectiveness of this melee weapon too much. And by say this melee weapon, it means all melee weapons, allowing players to destroy almost any part in 1 hit. This is true. They could slice through you like you were nothing. This change does not change the effectiveness of a single module in any way. However, the bonus is now 70% plus 56% plus 44%, so you basically get 170.8% instead of 210%. So it's a nerf, because obviously everyone's running around with their razor blades, knocking people's frames off. GL55 Impulse. So for those of us who are unawares, the GL55 Impulse actually fires huge projectiles downrange, either the equivalent of the Phoenix crossbow, as well as the size of cannons before they not nerfed, but buffed slash changed the projectile size of cannons. This makes it very easy to hit with impulses. So they are nerfing the projectile size. So since the projectile size is smaller, it means it will miss more often. Perk now requires 8 hits on the enemy instead of 5. This is another nerf. And the damage bonus of the next projectile after the 8 hits is 40% instead of 50%. This is a huge, and the cooling rate was reduced by 40%. I don't know what to say. Is the GL55 this dominant? Did I miss something? Like, I haven't seen the dominance of this. They're saying that between 6 and 9k, the GL55 has been slapping at cock, and that's the reason why this needs to happen. But holy shit, this is a massive nerf. In order to land 3 more shots before you get a 40% bonus, that's basically nerfing the perk by like 40 or 50%. That's insane, considering that if you miss, the number goes back up. So, and they also made it more likely for you to miss. So, if you guys have been running around slapping ass with the impulse, well, it's catching a nerf. The Mauler and the Lacerator, this is what I was talking about. The base damage reduced by 22% on the Mauler, and the base damage on the Lacerator reduced by 16% on the Lacerator. Presently, in case you guys didn't know, the base damage of the Mauler is actually 45 damage per tick. But with its singular perk, if you only have 1 Mauler equipped, it will say the number 50 because of the self-referential damage perk. The damage of the Lacerator base is, at least before this nerf, 50%. So, or not 50%, 50 damage, even. So what that means is, crap out the calculator. We know the base damage of the Lacerator is 50. We're going to multiply that by 8.4 or 0.84 for 84%. Means that the base damage of the Lacerator is now 42. Reduced by 22% on the Mauler is pretty interesting. We have 45 multiplied by 0.78. And the base damage of the Mauler is going down to 35.1. Those are some pretty big nerfs. Basically, obviously, combined with the Tormentor, this was just running around and just nuking people's frames. Not good. They didn't like it. They changed it. Narwhal. Projectile explosion now freezes parts by 35% instead of 20%. As they said, Jotun Narwhal demonstrates inadequate efficiency. Yeah, it does. Honestly, Narwhal needs a buff. I don't think that's the correct one. I think that moving more of its damage component off of its bullet into the blast would have been superior to the increasing the amount that it freezes. That's all. I just don't think that the cryo mechanic is rocking it. The Fortune. The fire rate reduced by 20%. Once again, high effectiveness at 9 to 12k. This is unfortunate. The fire rate is how quickly it fires its shots in between its own shots, not its reload speed or anything like that. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, it's going to go 1, 2, 3. I don't know why they would do that. Fortune has been a pretty big staple and is pretty strong. Avalanche, huge buff. Blast damage increased by 30%. Current blast damage is 200, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood. And because it's 500, 200, because it does a total of 700 damage. 500 bullet, 200 blast. 30% means it's gaining 60% or 60 more blast damage. Penetration ability increased from 40% to 70%. This is bad. Because the idea is that, I know that doesn't sound like it makes sense, but it does so much damage. It does 500 bullet damage. Like, there's nothing that really can take that other than super bumpers, right? So increasing the penetration ability means that it's more likely that your shot will pass through your opponent's build and not detonate. It will hit a couple parts, phase out the other side, and hit nothing. Projectile flight speed increased by 24%. Huge buff. This is massive, because many, if not all, avalanches in the game right now are projectile speed fused. This is going to change a lot. This is going to more level off the projectile's trajectory. It's going to travel much further, much further, especially with all those fused ones. Durability increased from 1.5 to 2.4k. Holy shit, nearly 1,000 more durability on the avalanche. That's insane. And of course, a massive nerf to go with that durability increase comes an incredible mass increase. And the projectile impulse upon hit and recoil is increased. They're probably doing this so that it actually works with the whale cabin. just so we're on the same page. With the whale cabin, if this thing manages to charge the whale cabin in one shot, that could be interesting. That would mean every other avalanche shot is basically going to be like an ass cracker. That would be pretty good. I'm actually interested in seeing that. This is good. But yeah, so balance changes incoming. Thanks for running around with lacerators, you assholes, and ruining lacerators for us. Oh man, lacerators were never that good. The only time that I've ever seen lacerators be awesome are on like shark builds, but now you're nerfing their damage down by so much. Oh my god. That's terrible. From 50 to, what did I say earlier, like 38, 37? Oof. Pretty brutal. Pretty brutal. This is what happens when you abuse game mechanics. This is what happens when you abuse the game mechanics. Alright, I'll let you guys go. Comments below. Peace.